Welcome to Heartbeat, where we huddle around our mempool campfire. Today, I have the honor of being joined by Arthur Van Pelt and Mark Hunter, who are the co-creators of the Dr. Bitcoin podcast. Hello, guys. How are you?
Hi, very good. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, I'm fine too, Danny. Thanks for having us.
Well, I'm really excited to learn more about your journey. Some of our viewers may not know you, so I think that a gleaming detail about people's lives and a great way for people to quickly get to know you is if you could tell us how it was that you first heard about Bitcoin and what was your orange pill moment where you knew that this was a technology worth dedicating your life to.
Shall I start, Mark?
Sure,
Yep.
go for it.
Yeah, I learned about Bitcoin in 2012. I did not dip my toes right away in it. I studied it from a distance for a bit, and only into 2013 I bought my first, and it was literally a dive into the rabbit hole. It felt really like that. I dabbled with a few altcoins, sorry. But since 2018-19 somewhere, I'm back to full Bitcoin again.
It's a journey that is similar to the journey that most of us go through. And when you heard about it in 2013, did somebody tell you about it, or did you just discover it on your own?
Nee, I remember reading in 2012. I remember reading an interview with a president or some hotshot who worked or had worked at, I think, Facebook, and he said advised everybody to buy one Bitcoin as a sort of insurance against stupid thing happening in the financial world. And I found that rather intriguing. So I learned more about Bitcoin from then onward. And I still remember when I put on when I started an account on the Bitcoin forum on Bitcoin Talk. That was the first thing that I did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a pity that the Bitcoin forum is not really a thing anymore. I also, that was one of the first things I did as well. But now everything happens on Bitcoin Twitter.
Yeah.
Okay, Mark, why don't you tell us about your journey, the beginning of your journey?
I got into it a bit later than Arthur. I was working in early 2017 in an office job that bored the pants off me. It was so dull. And there was a guy there that said, "Oh, just happened to mention you heard about this Bitcoin thing." I was like, "Oh, I've heard of it, but I don't know much about it." And I thought it was for other people, not for me, like stocks and shares. I thought that's something other people do. He said, "No, it's really easy to buy it." So I did a bit of digging, and it took me about 3 or 4 days of YouTube videos when I should have been working, to just massive deep dive on Bitcoin, blockchain, I started actually from the blockchain side of things. So that typical thing, if I'm in it for the tech, not the money, whatever, I actually was genuinely interested in what blockchain could do. And that led to the different Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies and bits and pieces. So I when I should have been working, I was doing a proper personal deep dive down the rabbit hole of crypto in 2017, just at the right time. And I got so involved in it that I got fired from that job in 2018 and went full time into crypto writing.
Okay. I think that the best way to approach today would be, because I want to cover several events with you guys, like historic Bitcoin events, but maybe the best way to do it is chronologically. So how do you guys feel if we start with MtGox and you guys tell us a little bit about what you know about MtGox, about what's going on right now with the recent movement of money, what people don't know about it that maybe it's important that they learn.
Sure. Well, I mean, I'm the perfect person to ask because I wrote the first book on Gox and its history, which I published this year. Because when Arthur and I were researching the Dr. Bitcoin podcast, there's a bit of crossover between Craig Wright and Gox. And through that, I figured out that no one has written about this. It's been going on for 10 years. I mean, it collapsed in February 2014, and the drip of news over the last 10 years, even with all that, no one's written a book about it. So I thought, well, it's about time somebody did. So I was interviewing people and speaking to people and doing all this different research and put it all together. And I think I went through a journey that a lot of other people would go through if they were to read the book or they were to find out more about it. In that I thought, oh, it's just an exchange that got hacked, because I came into it, as I said, in 2017. So by that point, it was 3 years old, and you learn a few bits. And so this big hack, but it was so much more than that. It was a series of hacks starting from its very earliest days. Um, Compounded by terrible mismanagement from not just the founder, but the CEO that bought it from him, and it culminated in this like 2.5 year long hack that these Russian guys were just pulling money out of the exchange. Anytime somebody put money into Mt. Gox, they were taking it out, and it wasn't the fact that it was going on, the fact that no one noticed, or no one apparently noticed. And it's just, there's so much more behind the scenes, so much more going on behind the scenes that people don't realize. And I won't go into too much detail here, but I think, yeah, people think it was just one hack, and it wasn't. It was a series of hacks that led to over 1 million Bitcoin in the end got stolen over 3 years. And so for the last 10 years since it was hacked, the creditors have been trying to get their coins back, basically, and through a long and arduous process. A lot of them opted for a cash payout because they could get the cash payout sooner. Some of them sold their claims to other companies, and some of them accepted cash payments, and they started to come through end of last year. And then literally today, all the various wallets that hold the Bitcoin that are controlled by the trustee, all that Bitcoin, 140,000 Bitcoin, was all consolidated today into one wallet. We assume, because the payouts are coming down the line, they're getting ready for payouts, so they put them all into one wallet to start the payouts. But just that one movement, not even to an exchange to sell, that one movement from one wallet to a different wallet was enough to cause panic in the streets, and to start like a 2 or 3% drop in Bitcoin, because people are worried that all this Bitcoin is going to be sent out in one go and immediately sold off by 20 odd thousand people. And it's just not going to happen that way. It's going to be a slow drip feed out to go to the exchanges that are looking after it. The exchanges have to hold it for a while and go through processes. They'll stagger it out to the people that are going to get the money, and they might sell, they might hold. My thinking is a lot of the people that bought Bitcoin back in the day, yeah, they've made a profit, but they're hardcore Bitcoiners, a lot of them. So they're going to be holding. They're not going to sell in the middle of this bull run. They're going to be holding it. So there's so much fear mongering going on at the moment, and so much of it is unwarranted. That's my thinking anyway. I'm not sure if Arthur's got a different perspective on it.
No, I'm thinking exactly the same. I never bothered too much to dive into what happened at Mt. Gox. To be fair, I only remember that back in 2012, when I was looking for an exchange to the only exchange that I came across was back then Mt. Gox. It was the biggest, and there were several smaller ones, but that were in countries that I did not want to be. And there was this Japanese exchange, and I remember going over the website. It was a bit shady, in my opinion, so I didn't dare to open an account at Mt. Gox, and it took me until 2013 when I opened an account at Bitstamp. That was just started, I think, 1 or 2 years earlier, and that was an exchange that I trusted. Otherwise, I could have and would have been on Mt. Gox also, but I didn't like the layout of the website, I remember.
Hmm.
The layout saved you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, do you think that it was part of an inside job for it to be able to go on for so long? Or is this theory being debunked?
Well, nothing's been debunked as such, because Mark Karpeles hasn't confirmed anything. The one big thing we still don't know about Mt. Gox is how the Bitcoin was stored. He has gone through various interviews, and he's gone through a legal process in Japan, but every turn he's given varying accounts of how the Bitcoin was stored. He's never actually explicitly said whether they were in several cold wallets and he had the public keys, whether they were in one cold wallet and he didn't have the keys. We don't know how many wallets there were, how many cold wallets there were, where the private keys were stored, where the addresses were stored. So that we don't even know how the Bitcoin was stored over all these years. But in terms of whether the actual series of thefts were an inside job, that has pretty much been debunked because he went through a court process and he was never even charged with that. There was so little evidence of an inside hack that he was never charged with it. And since then, all the evidence has come out through mainly the legal process against this guy called Vitalik Buterin. Sorry, what's the chap's name? I have a complete brain freeze now. But the Russian guy who was who was convicted of the money laundering of Bitcoin from MtGox because of Alexander Vinnik, that was it. Because of the process he's gone through, they've gathered a lot of information from him since his arrest in 2017. And the US authorities have charged various Russians with the hacking, with the laundering. And from my personal point of view, if Mark Karpeles had stolen tens or hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin, he would have done something with it by now. There's no record of the Bitcoin even existing anymore because it was taken by these Russian guys, laundered through this BTCE website, and farmed out to various shell companies in the Cayman Islands and abroad. So it was all part of this Russian money laundering network. The Bitcoins, they don't exist anymore. They were laundered out into property, all sorts of things across various shady entities. So I think initially I understand why there was the thinking it was an inside job because that's the easy explanation. But as time has gone on, I think it's pretty much been shown that he was incompetent. Yes, very incompetent, but he wasn't malicious in his actions.
Got you. So one thing I forgot to mention before we started, guys, is at the end when we say bye, don't leave because the way the software works is that it's uploading from your computer onto the cloud. Okay, so if you get disconnected or something, just come back. Okay. Okay. So okay. So let's continue with the Bitcoin timeline. Let's get away a little bit from MtGox, but we'll return to this when we dive into Craig Wright a little bit further along the way. So, what, Arthur, were you following the HODLNOW case? Were you involved with that court proceedings?
Oh yeah. Actually, my history with Craig Wright is slightly longer. I learned about him already in 2015 when he was mentioned in Wired and Gizmodo. I was already like, nah, I'm not so convinced. Then in 2016, he did the signing sessions. That was for me, the final that I thought, nah, this is not Satoshi. Then I paid no attention to him, but mentioning HODLNOW, that was actually for me the moment that I started paying attention again, and more than some attention. I decided, because I considered HODLNOW, and I still do, an online friend of me. I've never seen him in real life yet, but we did, for example, the lightning torch together. I mean, I participated in that thing that he set up, and that was, I think, in 2018, late 2018 or early 2019. And a bit after that, in March, April, Craig Wright started chasing him. And that was for me a bit of a moment that I thought, I'm going to help him, not only him, but also the wider Bitcoin community. And I want to map out all the fraud that I already came across since 2015. Because, I'm always reading about Bitcoin and things related to Bitcoin. Which here and there includes the forks of Bitcoin and people who are involved with those forks of Bitcoin, like Roger Ver and Craig Wright and Calvin Ayre, etc. But what enraged me basically was when HODLNOW was. Calvin and Craig put $5,000 on his head for his information, where he lived and etc. And that I was not so much amused. And that looking back, I had no idea that I had the stamina to hold on until now, to be honest. There have been one or two moments that I thought, nah, I should stop this. I have also better things to do. But somehow the story of Craig Wright and his saga of trying to become known as Satoshi is quite fascinating. So I hold on until now.
Yeah, I was around for many of the events that you described, and I was on Twitter and I read Calvin Ayre's reward, and um, and it was a little bit crushing to think that these people would go to that extent as to put a bounty on someone's head. It was kind of crossing a lot of moral lines.
Yep.
I have a question for you about the signing sessions. I specifically was thinking about that, and I found it really interesting that you had the opposite reaction, because the signing sessions actually convinced a lot of people, including Anderson, that Craig Wright was Satoshi. Why did it have the opposite effect on you?
Now that was basically mostly because I did not only took Gavin Anderson's word for granted, I also heard several Bitcoin experts and security experts. Don Kaminsky, I remember. It was a bit of a turmoil at that moment, and lots of people have been writing about it. But especially the first on the May the 2nd, when Craig Wright put up a blog post about the Sartre signing. Yeah, that was. I cannot describe that as anything else as gobbledygook. Actually, it was just a scam. It was pretending to be something that has to do with a signing. And we learned later from Gavin Anderson that he also expected that a publicly verifiable signing information would be published, but that did not happen. And that could not be read in that Sartre blog post of. So that was a big failure. So the people that I trusted, the security people, the Bitcoin experts, especially the technical Bitcoin experts that I read immediately on the 2nd and the 3rd and the 4th of May, they all said, no, this is just rubbish. He is. I remember he was even reusing an existing signing information in part or something, and yeah, it was just a fraud.
Yeah, Anderson has some theories on how he got conned that day, because Jimmy Song, the first episode of this podcast was an episode about the COPA case, and I collected some articles, amongst which one of them was from Jimmy Song explaining a way to create false signatures, exploiting like a one part of the signing equation. So yeah, it's a shame that he was able to con so many people into believing he was Satoshi. I'm Colombian, and the Colombians, like the government of Bogota, gave Craig Wright an award
Yeah.
for being
I remember.
It's so embarrassing. It's so embarrassing. But like that, I mean, I sometimes wonder, like, what was the interest of Colombians to get involved in that? If it's because of the gambling and the narco trafficking, like, what interest did the Colombian government have at all of getting involved with that? It's very confusing.
It's such a random location. Like there are some geographical locations that we link to Craig Wright, but that's not one of them. I don't know how that happened.
Yes, that's why I find it particularly suspicious
Yeah.
as to Calvin Iris affairs.
Yes.
Okay, so why don't you tell us a little bit about like what the Hodl Now trial was like? Did you follow it closely? And what do you think about the recent dismissal? Because it wasn't only like last month. I think it was only last month that finally Craig Wright gave up on his opportunity to refute the decision.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, as for the trial itself, it was kind of we did follow it because we were well into the podcast by then. We started the podcast on the first day of the Kleiman versus Wright trial in 2021, and so the Hodlonaut trial was the year after. So we were kind of well into it by then. So we were well practiced in what happened with these things, and to an extent, it followed what we thought it was going to follow. You know, Craig Wright just waffled on the stand. I mean, he wasn't put under particularly serious scrutiny, but again, everything he said was easily falsified by the evidence. I mean, he submitted a massive bundle of evidence, which was all pulled apart by forensics experts for the second time in as many years. And every time he tried to sort of say something on the stand to argue against it, it was just just nonsense. It was just trying to find an excuse, trying to find a way out without thinking it's going to come back on him. He brought along a bunch of witnesses again, who just, some of them outright lied, we know now, and we suspected at the time, and some of them just did not back up his case. They were just weak. They didn't. No one has seen him. They all talk about these things like, oh, he was right. He gave me the copy of the white paper, gave me this, gave me that, run some code on my laptop. No one has seen Craig Wright do anything with regards to Bitcoin, like in terms of the creation, the original writing of the white paper, the coding, nothing. It's all the witnesses he gathers only ever saw him do anything regarding blockchain from 2011 onwards. And he's just convinced them over years and years and years. He's convinced them, oh, this was to do with Bitcoin. This was to do with Bitcoin. When at the time, it wasn't. So that was the start of his process of doing that. So the funny thing about that case actually is Craig Wright, as we know he is wont to do, he changed his law firm for that court case, and we found out afterwards that was because he wasn't happy with the way his initial law firm was handling the case. He wanted to go down a certain way, and they said, no, don't do that, do this. And so he fired his original law firm because he thought because they didn't do what he wanted. So he got this new law firm in, they did what he wanted, and he lost. Which is just a fantastic piece of irony and idiocy combined. So he lost the case. So the judge essentially said, there is nothing that has been presented in this case that changes the prevailing view that he is not Satoshi. That was the original ruling, and therefore Hodlonaut did not. It couldn't be considered libel. Was basically the ruling. He did not defame Craig Wright because it counted a freedom of speech, and he then appealed because that's what he always does. And Hodlonaut said himself that appeals are almost a rite of passage in these cases. You are almost always guaranteed an appeal. So Craig Wright appealed, and the appeal was given the okay. And then it was supposed to be, I'm assuming this year, the appeal was supposed to be a complete retrial. Not because in some countries like the UK, if you appeal, it goes to a higher court up, and you get different judges overseeing it. So you get three judges where there was one. That's the process here. But in Norway, the whole case is rerun, and that was going to happen. But then, following Craig Wright's loss to COPA, he pulled the appeal. He said, no, we're not going to go through the second trial. So Hodlonaut is the clear victor in that case.
Question, because I feel like with your expertise, you might have a more informed opinion than what I know. Have you guys ever visited a website called vu.hn, which is like an article called Bitcoin Origins, and it's a guy telling a story about Bitcoin before 2009 and being on like some cryptography chats and discussing Bitcoin with Satoshi, like in these cryptography chats.
I've not come across that. Arthur, have you?
Yeah, that is. Isn't that the other Australian guy? He is also pretending to be or to have been part of Team Satoshi, together with Craig Wright. Yeah, that's not what you should do to make yourself believable. So, when Craig Wright has never been into Team Satoshi, then this guy who is taking a ride along that story is of course.
Yeah, don't hitch your wagon to that horse. No.
But what's his name? I think he's also from Australia.
I don't know.
No, don't take that stuff too seriously. I mean, if you grab some public information, what Craig Wright has always been doing, and you make a nice mix of believable stories out of that public information, everyone can pretend to be Satoshi Nakamoto, and that's what this guy also has been doing.
I'm interested in Dave Kleiman than I am in Craig Wright. To me, what leaves me with a grain of curiosity is Dave Kleiman's story. And have you ever considered the possibility that he could have been Satoshi?
No, absolutely not. No.
Why do you say it with so much certainty? That's what I'm curious about.
No, the poor guy has been dragged into the fraud story of Craig Wright. I mean,
I see.
he was a good computer consultant, and he did good work, I think, in cybersecurity and stuff like that. But it's well, for me, it's 99.99% sure that he probably didn't even hear about Bitcoin before he died in April 2013. There is no direct or indirect anecdotes are known from his family, from his friends, from his wife or ex-wife, that he ever mentioned Bitcoin, did something with Bitcoin. They did not find anything Bitcoin related on his devices when he died. It's all made up by Craig Wright. He started when Dave Kleiman died in April 2013. Craig Wright remembered that they did some business, or they tried to do some business in 2011 with a company called W&K, and that was about cybersecurity projects for homeland security in America. And that was quite convenient for Craig Wright to add some new Potemkin villages to his tax fraud in Australia. So he dragged David into his tax fraud and pretended that they had been doing a lot of stuff with Bitcoin. It started actually with a little bit of Bitcoin mining in 2009 or a bit later, I think, and that story morphed into 2014. Morphed into Craig Wright starting to role play Satoshi. But again, poor Dave Kleiman, he probably didn't even know about Bitcoin before he died.
And he would have had to have created it in absolute secrecy whilst working with Craig Wright at the same time. So there is just no.
Craig Wright and secrecy don't go hand in hand.
I find the idea it would have to be a massive coincidence for Dave Kleiman to have created Bitcoin in absolute secrecy whilst working with Craig Wright on various other bits, never telling him about it, and Craig Wright just happens to come across the Satoshi story to back up his own scam with the ATO a few years later. It's just too it's one coincidence too many for me.
So
Yeah.
Ira Kleiman's belief that she is owed the Bitcoin from the Tulip Trust is not related to Dave Kleiman's possible involvement in Bitcoin's origin.
I mean, if you go along with Craig Wright's story, then there's a connection there. I mean, if that really happened, then there's a case. But the whole thing is a complete work of fiction. So there's this argument. People do say, well, the court in Kleiman, they confirmed that Craig Wright was Satoshi. Well, no, because the whole thing was run on the premise he was Satoshi because it suited both parties. Ira Kleiman needs Craig Wright to be Satoshi for him to try and get his hands on half the Bitcoin. And Craig Wright needs to be Satoshi because his whole career is based on that. It suited both parties. It was never going to be about proving it one way or the other. It was just accepted because it was useful for both parties. That's the long and short of it.
Yeah. And talking about the Tulip Trust, it is one of those, I call it Potemkin villages that Craig Wright set up to build his Satoshi Saga on. And that started in 2014 in October. That's where the Tulip Trust started, and he backdated contracts and emails and other stuff with Dave Kleiman mostly, that he was mentioned in those documents in 2009, 2010, 2011, especially 2011, that, for example, 1.1 million Bitcoin was sent by Craig Wright to Dave Kleiman in 2011, and that was put in the Tulip Trust. Well, the Tulip Trust didn't even exist before 2014. 1.1 Bitcoin, Craig Wright never had it because he never was and will never be Satoshi. So it's like Mark said, it's a work of fiction. It's all a big, large fantasy supported by lies and a lot of forgeries.
And you can tell that because the story has changed over the years. As Arthur said, initially it was 1.1 million mined Bitcoin being sent offshore for tax reasons. You can kind of understand that if you're Satoshi to a point. but it's changed. Every court case, it changes. It's gone from 1 Tulip Trust to 3 Tulip Trusts. The Bitcoin was in Tulip Trust 1, then it was in Tulip Trust 2. The whole thing. He repurposes this thing for every single court case. When the next document comes out as being a forgery, he just changes the Tulip Trust again to be something else. So that's the other reason why you know it's a fake, because the story changes year after year.
Yeah. So if you dive, and the last thing probably that we can say about it, when you don't have to trust my words, just dive into the details of for example, the ATO reports. They specifically say the Tulip Trust doesn't exist. It's a work of fiction. In the Kleiman case, also ruled by what's this guy's name?
Reinhardt.
Judge Reinhardt also said Tulip Trust does not exist. Probably in, I'm not 100% sure, but Hodlnot case, but for 100% sure, also now recently in the COPA case, same story. Also Judge Meller said Tulip Trust, So all those professional parties that have been looking at the Tulip Trust. Oh, and don't forget, Mr. Calvin Ayre himself. He put his team in Switzerland on it, and he wrote an email last year in September to Craig Wright, and that email got leaked by Kristen Ager Hansen, the full email. And he said they found out that the paper trail of Tulip Trust does not match anything, so I'm not expecting that my loans that I gave to you, Mr. Craig Wright, your legal spree was based on on his loans. That he said you're what did he say? Pissing away my kids' inheritance, because I will never get back those loans, because the Tulip Trust that you used as a collateral for the loans does not exist. So even Calvin Ayre knows.
So you think that, basically, to round up what you said, you think that Ira Kleiman's conviction that she was entitled to this Bitcoin that Craig Wright had supposedly stolen emerged as the result of as a result of Craig Wright's own fictitious story, like
Yep.
her conviction emerged from his fantasy. Gotcha.
Yeah, because he went from a bunch of documents that Craig produced for the ATO, and whether those documents are true or not, Craig says they're true. So Ira said, "Yep, okay, let's go with it."
If they're true, then you owe me. Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's move further ahead in time and let's get into the COPA trial. So COPA is an organization trying to protect open source developers. Do you want to tell us about how that played out?
Shall I give it a start?
Yeah, go ahead.
How COPA started? That was actually, it's slightly convoluted, but I dived into the detail together with Mark, of course. But it started with Craig Wright sending letters around that he had copyright, and he warned several exchanges and COPA members that he would start suing based on the copyright that he claimed to own. Then I think bitcoincore.org pulled the white paper, and other parties informed COPA, and they said, what should we do with it? Then COPA took over. COPA is a non-profit organization that is basically for the patents in the blockchain world, but this is of course sort of related to it. So COPA felt the need to act on behalf of those parties. COPA sent a letter to Craig Wright asking for proof. Can you prove that you have copyright? Then we can discuss it and see what we can do about it. But Craig Wright answered. He said, "No, you're not entitled to get that information. I'm requesting that your members are pulling all the white papers that they are using, and that they're not passing off Bitcoin as a BTC, but it should be a BSV." Then COPA said, "No, we're not going to wait for that lawsuit to happen. We're going to sue you." And then they requested a negative declaratory relief, I think it's called,
Yeah.
for you do not have copyright. And basically that also means that he is not Satoshi Nakamoto. So that all happened within a few months in 2021.
Question.
Oh, sure.
Even if Satoshi Nakamoto did come into the scene, would he have copyright rights over the white paper or the Bitcoin code?
Technically speaking, no. That is a bit of you have to know a bit about those details. First of all, when he put his first stuff online on, oh dear, what was the name of on MtGox, I think it was, and they had a cypherpunk license that you cannot sue each other for copyright stuff. So everything that is rolled out and made public under on the MtGox was already not nobody can claim copyright of it. Then a bit later, it went to SourceForge. And on SourceForge, they used the MIT license, and that also says that it is everybody can use it publicly without too much trouble about that you have to bother about copyright and licensing and stuff like that. What also happened, not many know this, in 2010, in December, Satoshi left. I'm sure that you know, Dani. The moment he left, he also released his last version. I don't remember. I think 3.19 or something. That was the last version of Bitcoin that he released. And at that moment, the day just before the release, Satoshi himself changed the copyright information from his name to the Bitcoin developers. And he did that as good as possible as he could, because it is intertwined in all the software and in a lot of notes and text files and etc. I think he forgot one or two, but that really doesn't matter. I mean, the intention of him was to hand over all the stuff to the Bitcoin developers in general, which means that if that already happened in 2010, then after 2010, only the Bitcoin developers can claim, if they want, but they can't because it falls under the MIT license. They can try to claim something. So Craig Wright does not even if he was Satoshi, he does not even have any copyright, not as Craig Wright and not as Satoshi either, because the Bitcoin developers never handed back the copyright from their point of view.
Yeah. So is that he got himself in a pickle that he asked for. So they created the lawsuit. The object of the lawsuit was to prove a negative, so that he did not have the proof. That way the developers could continue to work without feeling the threat, because people were leaving. Was that happening? Like, developers were stepping back?
Yeah, a few.
And how is that today? Like, do you feel like that has had the desired effect on the open source community?
The least I can say is that, for example, a guy like Peter Wulle, by accident I thought he was a Dutch guy, but he's in fact from Belgium. He is one of those people who he said, I'm not here in Bitcoin to run lawsuits against people who are against Bitcoin. So he was toning down and stepping back. And recently he said that he is considering coming back again now that Craig Wright is gone. Yeah, it happens.
Yeah, because it's important for intelligent minds to continue to work at Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is not fully realized and it still needs the support of the community. Okay, so the most controversial question: who are your biggest candidates for the Satoshi Nakamoto title?
I mean, it's funny when you first get into Bitcoin. I think you have like quite a strong idea. You hear some names and you kind of think, "Oh yeah, that sounds feasible," because you haven't really done much research.
Mm-hmm.
But then the more research that you do, the more difficult it is to make a decision. So, I mean, I don't know anyone who I who I really respect in the space who has got a strong opinion one way or the other. Because if you hear someone say, "Oh, it's definitely this person," then you think, well, how can you be so absolutely sure? So I'm always a bit wary when somebody says it's definitely this person. I mean, I don't, I don't even know if it was a team or an individual. We know that analysis of the white paper, like textual analysis of the white paper, shows that there were a number of people whose writing styles went into it. So you could argue that if the white paper has got a number of writers, then that makes sense that the whole project has got a number of people involved, and it's quite such a complex beast. That makes sense as well. I mean, there are little bits of all the candidates. They've all got little bits and pieces that they could have put into it. And I personally, I've come to the point where I can't pick one. Out of all the candidates that are known, I can't pick one. But I like the idea that it's someone that we've never even mentioned, someone that's never even been considered. I love the idea, this completely left field guy or girl that no one's ever mentioned, wherein they wanted to do this secretly, they left at the right time, and everyone is so far away from revealing them that they must be just like squealing with delight that they got away with it.
Yes. What I haven't researched, I feel like after you're in Bitcoin for a while, it becomes less and less important who Satoshi is. But I feel like when you first arrive, you desperately search to find the answer to that question, to that mystery that nobody has been able to find. And I remember reading back then articles that kind of stated that the majority of the that basically discarded the possibility that the majority of the candidates that we have right now could have been the authors because either their schedules don't match or their like writing style didn't match. So yeah, I think that's interesting.
The most mentioned candidates are like Adam Beck, Hal Finney, Lance Sessaman, Nick Szabo, of course, is often mentioned. Yeah, there are several, and I can only say I do not consider any of them being Satoshi. Although I do see several things that I think, yeah, it might be possible if it turns out it was Hal Finney anyway. And he was emailing himself when he was emailing with Satoshi, and he was quite cleverly doing that. And he fooled everyone with those emails. Yeah, technically it might be possible. Nick Szabo is of course a good candidate. Adam Beck has always been mentioned. In fact, I do not consider him being a good candidate because he is, although he was in contact with, he was probably the first that we know of who was in contact with Satoshi very, very early, August 2008 already. But his writing style and the way how he speaks is very different from Satoshi. Nou ja, in April 2011, Satoshi said, bye-bye, I'm gone. I moved on to other projects. I will not be back. And I respect that. He never wanted to be known. No, and as far as we know, of course, there have been a few emails that might look like a little bit that Satoshi has been writing them. For example, to mention that he was not Dorian Nakamoto in 2014. It appears that Satoshi wrote an email about that back then. And there are one or two other emails, but they might be spoofed also. So we don't know. It's a bit controversial. All in all, I respect his wish to remain anonymous. So I'm not going to mention my favorite candidate because I don't have one.
The only thing we do know is who it isn't. And it isn't Craig Wright.
Yes.
And you know what the funny thing is? When the ruling, when the injunction is finally written down by the judge next month, when the parties come together to decide what his punishment is, the funny thing is, Craig Wright has been campaigning for the past 10 years to be Satoshi Nakamoto. He will be the first person in the world who is legally not allowed to call himself Satoshi.
All Satoshi except Craig Wright.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
never been truer. In legally speaking, that's the case.
I thought it's really interesting, Arthur, that you brought up his last email because I precisely wanted to talk to you about like that whole thing. Like he's like, oh, Bitcoin is in good hands now. I'm moving on. Like, a part of this makes me angry. It's like, what do you mean? Like, we're all here, like, trying to dedicate our lives to Bitcoin, and you're moving on to other projects. Like, what are these other projects that are better than Bitcoin? but
Yeah.
that's just. I do respect him in the sense of continuing to be anonymous, but it does irritate me a little bit to be like, bye guys, I'm moving on to better things.
Yeah, and we don't know what projects they are. Or are they Bitcoin related? Or they are probably not. But are they cryptocurrency related? Are they cryptography related? Are they cybersecurity related? We just don't know.
And he's clearly, let's assume it is a guy, let's say it's a guy, he's clearly an intelligent guy, so I don't believe for a second this was the first thing he created, and I don't believe it's the last thing he created, so what else has he made that, I can't imagine all his other creations were failures, so what else has he created that we just don't know?
That makes the theory of it being multiple people, but is that keeping a secret amongst multiple people is so hard. So that's
Yeah,
a hard one. And also, what
yeah.
do you think about the coins? Do you think they're ever going to be moved, or at least like in the next 50 years?
No, I think we're done. I think Satoshi either lost the private keys or destroyed them.
So that his system would prevail?
I just because I get the feeling that it was never about financial value, and it might be the case that if he even kept them, he might have. You think he's so busy in those early days, he may not even have kept all the private keys in the first place. But if he did keep them, I can only imagine they've been lost or either lost over in the passage of time, or intentionally destroyed because he didn't want to be responsible for that amount of money like being around. There's numerous ways you could look at it, but because it was never about financial value, I think they're either lost. They were either never recorded, lost, or intentionally destroyed when he left because he thought, I don't want the pressure of having this to deal with, or anyone having this.
And I have sometimes, this is, I think I never told this in public, but I have sometimes a sort of a wild dream that Satoshi at some point, presuming that he is still alive and still has access to his private keys, that he will just pick, because we now are above 400 million of users, that maybe in 10 years, when we are at a few billion users, that he will just say, I'm going to pick from the last year or 1 year all the active addresses. I'm going to divide my stash in, let's say 2 billion different addresses, and I'm going to send everyone a part of that, let's say 1 million Bitcoin that he has. And he brings it in circulation, back in circulation again, by sending it or gifting it to the people who are or who have been active, let's say in the last year at some point. Now that is a sort of a dream that I have, that I hope, not expect really, but what I hope, what he will do with his with his wealth.
This kind of objective was to leave us all with like this allure to the mystery, and to leave us with our imagination running, because that's so much more powerful than to have like a straight answer, because now all of us have a machinery going on about who he was, where he was, what's the motivation, is he alive, is he dead, what's he gonna do with the coins?
Yeah.
Very alluring, the big mystery.
Yeah,
But
no, in
this
general, I don't care much about him. I always cared about truth in the Bitcoin arena, about people, because Craig Wright, for example, he's not the only one. Huh? I mean, we know about more than 10, between 10 and 15 of those people. You just mentioned one, in another one in Australia, but there are several more in Russia, in another one in England. I hope to publish in the upcoming month about another Faketoshi that I came across, who is scamming on a smaller scale, to be honest, but still he is scamming in England already for many years, actually, also since 2014 or 15. So I put I already wrote a big article about him, but I have to wait the legal teams asked me to wait with revealing that information. So and there are more on Hawaii, in Australia, in America. Even a lady in America is pretending to be Satoshi. So there are many of them. But Craig Wright was the most notorious one, so to say.
Yes, because his entrance on the scene was very pronounced. It was very visible, like the whole thing about with the article in the Wired magazine. It was kind of a big scandal.
No. Yeah, but for example, in Germany, there is a guy, Jorg Molt. No, he's now in jail, as far as we know. He scammed also for several hundred thousands of euros with a Bitcoin pension or some fund. But it was also a big scam. No, he was taken from the street, and I think 1 or 2 years ago, and he's now in jail. So yeah.
Were you gonna say something, Mark?
No, it's all right. You carry on.
Well, we're getting closer to the end, so why don't you tell us a little bit about what you guys are doing now in the Bitcoin ecosystem? What are you like upcoming projects? Well, you just told us about this article you wrote, but why don't you share with our viewers like what you do so they can support you and find?
Well, I'll just say quickly what our plans for the podcast are. We haven't finished with Craig Wright yet. He's still very much on our agenda. So we're still going with the podcast. We're still covering the fallout from the COPA case and his other court cases and what happens from there, potential criminal charges, that sort of thing. So that's going nowhere. But we've got we're going to turn the podcast into potentially up to 3 books covering his 10-year long attempt to claim the Satoshi mantle. So we're nearly finished with the first book, and it was going to be 2 books, but there's just so much there, especially with what's happened with COPA, that we think we're going to be doing 3 books to cover everything. So that's going to cover us for the next few years. So that's what we're going to be kind of pushing into whilst still doing the podcast for the next 2 or 3 years.
That reminded me of a question that I had earlier, but I forgot. Is there anything that Craig has said that has not been proven to be fraud, and that it would be difficult for him to know if he hadn't been involved some way with the early days of Bitcoin?
Not that I can think of. I mean, that was one of the points the judge made, actually, in the COPA ruling. He said, on the surface, Craig Wright seems to be very knowledgeable about Bitcoin and its history, but there's nothing that he mentioned at the trial in all his hundreds of pages of witness statements and his time on the stand. Nothing he said could not have been learned by public information. And that speaks volumes. There is nothing he has said that only Satoshi could know. It's a bit like when you get someone that confesses to a crime and the police interview them and they ask them all these questions and everything they have said was in the newspapers. It's a similar principle.
Yeah, that was exactly my question. Did he know what the murder weapon was without, and no, that we haven't been able to disprove?
No, he mixes public information with strong opinions, and it comes across as unique fact.
Because the part that I still haven't, up to this moment, I still hadn't been able to form an opinion about was whether, because I'm sure he's not Satoshi, but whether he had been privy to information, maybe had been around privileged information that he had learned that had allowed him to impersonate Satoshi so well. But from what you say, not really.
No, it's not. Again, he makes a good act of that. But from what we know from the last couple of court cases, it all started he only found out about Bitcoin in 2011, and he only started really getting involved in it in 2013. So before 2011, he had never heard of it, certainly never mentioned it anywhere. 2011, he first wrote about it very briefly, spelt it wrong numerous times, undermined what Satoshi had said, didn't do anything for 2 years, and in 2 years after that, 2013, he started using it to further his tax scam. So no, there is no privileged information. There are a lot of people that say, "Oh no, don't think he's Satoshi, but I think he was around at the time." There is no evidence to suggest anything like that happened. And there's everything to suggest it was 2011 onwards.
And allow me, because I always have this one example that I use at least once a year for how to explain that it is 100% certain that Craig Wright is not Satoshi Nakamoto. He once explained, that was in 2019, how there are 6 days between the Genesis block and block 1. As you might know, that the Genesis block, the very first block that Satoshi created, hard-coded, that is dated January the 3rd, but it took 6 days before block 1 was created by mining, of course in January 2009. Now, those 6 days are not to be, you cannot explain that, because normally there are 10 minutes between the blocks in Bitcoin. So that is a pretty weird story. Now, Craig Wright, trying to be a Bitcoin expert, being Satoshi, he tried to explain that several times on stage, in blog posts and in interviews and etc. 4 or 5 times. That was 6 days, because Microsoft Patch Tuesday rolled out that stopped my Bitcoin mining network. And it took me 6 days to build a new network before I could continue. Now, the moment I came across that story, I looked up when was Microsoft Patch Tuesday in January 2009. That was actually not on January the 3rd, but on January the 13th. So there were 10 days. He was off 10 days with it. And the actual story why there is 6 days between January 3 and January 9 is because Satoshi on purpose waited for the first miners to come across. That was even hard-coded in his code, that his mining rigs would not switch on before there were other mining rigs active. And that could only happen because he put the software online on January the 8th, and the first people started mining on January the 9th. And then he switched on his own mining rigs to not be accused later. I think that is what we think is the reason why he waited for 6 days, that he was not being accused of selfish pre-mining. So yeah, when Craig Wright is making up a story that has already flaws and stuff, he lied about running 69 or 67 mining rigs or for a Bitcoin network that could run on a simple laptop or 2 or 3 all over the world. So we know for those type of reasons, Craig Wright, he's just not Satoshi Nakamoto.
I love this piece of Bitcoin trivia, because I didn't know that he had waited for other miners to come online, and I think that just is really in character with the rest of like this, who Satoshi was or is, which is completely against character with like who Craig Wright is. Craig Wright is a selfish person, greedy person, very law-driven, while Satoshi was, in his communications and in his creation, doesn't display any of these characteristics. So I really love like how in character this origin story is. It's really exciting because it goes in line with him abandoning the coins.
Yeah, exactly.
And walking away. Well, guys, it's been wonderful. Oh, sorry, Arthur, I didn't give you a chance to share with us what you're doing and how can people find you and what's next for you.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm on Twitter. I'm slightly less active because now that the saga of Craig Wright has finished, I am already starting to notice that I'm moving on. I spend more time with my children, my family. I have 2 young kids that I take care of. I love spending a lot of time with them also. Of course, I am involved with the books that Mark is writing, because I have been writing for 5 years. My material on my Medium page, mylegacykit.medium.com. You can find over 40 long-form articles. I think it is enough for 6 books to fill. But the summary is written by Mark mostly. He is sort of taking my material and writing
cutting
those
it down,
books. Huh?
editing it brutally.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm also a Bitcoin consultant, so I do have a job also for a bit. I'm self-employed, so I can spend my time when I like. I work for a few companies where I help them with solar energy and Bitcoin mining and stuff like that. So I'm not bored, but talking about Craig Wright, I'm already starting to notice that he is not so much on my radar anymore. Now that basically Judge Meller rewrote my articles into a judgment, literally almost. I mean, my material has been spot on. It's amazing to read through Justice Meller's judgment over, what was it, 350 pages of stuff over 2 documents. Yeah, I was like, yeah, I recognize everything. The only question for me is, will this have a follow-up in a criminal sense? And that's why I'm following along with Mark still for the Bitcoin podcast. I think we did over 50 or 60 episodes. It was tremendous fun, and I hope we will continue with it by releasing the books.
Yeah, just so your viewers know, the podcast is called Dr. Bitcoin, the man who wasn't Satoshi Nakamoto. We're on YouTube, we're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all the podcast outlets. We're on Twitter as well. The podcast is on Twitter at Dr. Bitcoin Pod, and you can find me at Twitter at 20nothing00.
Okay. So, to the audience, I think the lesson for today is go and buy $100 of Bitcoin if you don't have any yet. That will provoke you to go down the rabbit hole with no return. And look at the description so you can find the links to their social media. Go to Medium, go to YouTube, watch their videos so you can become more informed. And like, I think my closing thoughts are, at some all even bad press is press. So at some point, giving more space to Craig Wright is to like give him more importance and value. So I'm looking forward to what you guys decide to put your attention on next, because I'm sure it's going to be something very interesting, and that we will all be able to learn from your insights. So I look forward to seeing how your stories develop in the future and to have you again on the show one day.
We'd love to. Thanks a lot.
Happy to do that. Thank you for having us. It was great.
Thank you for coming. It was a great experience. I learned a lot from you, and I hope the audience did too. Thank you, everybody. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and we'll see you all very soon.